Welcome to Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura, and today I'd like to take a moment and share a personal side of me. I'm often asked, when did you start sewing and how did you start sewing? So today I'd like to tell you about that. My first memory of sewing, I was very, very young. As a matter of fact, I don't have a memory of me not sewing. I started sewing at a very young age. My mother would sew and she would make clothing for the family and things that needed to be done in the house. And I was very fascinated with the sewing machine and the cutting and everything to go with the sewing. So I started really not at my mother's knee, but on my mother's knee as I was sewing. She never ever stopped me from being creative. What leftover scraps were available, I was able to do with whatever I felt I wanted to make. And that allowed me to be very creative and not follow any rules, because at a young age, there were no rules. I just had fun sewing. As I started to develop my skills, I wanted to make my own clothing. So my mother gave me her book of sewing that she had when she went to school. That book showed you how to draft your own patterns, sew in zippers, and do everything that we needed to do. So I hit that book and I practiced how to sew and doing all sorts of things with the help of my mother in the kitchen while I was sitting in the dining room with the sewing machine on the dining room table. Another creative outlet that I was able to experience was being able to take clothing apart. We would often go to the secondhand store and buy clothing that was more for the fabric and the notions than for the garment itself. Because a lot of times you could not get a garment that would fit you. So it had to be altered, so my mother figured we might as well make it from scratch. So we would take that garment home, we would take it apart, and we would press it, wash what fabric we could, and we had all the notions that we needed. We had our zippers, the interfacing. Sometimes we would even take some of the top basting thread and wrap it up on a spool so that we could use it again. My earliest memory of taking one of these coats apart was a coat for me. What I remember the most about the coat was the buttons. They were big buttons. Now they might have been not this big, but as a child they seemed very big to me. They were beautiful red and it looked like a pomegranate had been cut in half because it had all these types of seeds inside. Now I don't remember the color of the coat. I assume it was red, but I don't remember it. But I do remember the buttons. And I do remember wearing that coat to school and how proud I was of those big buttons. And as my brother and I were walking to school, I was showing him and everyone that I came into, the teachers included, my brand new coat with the big, beautiful buttons. So taking apart clothing really gives you a whole new outlook on how to sew. When you see how the garments are made first, it kind of gives you an idea on how to put them together, because you need to take them apart in reverse of how you sew them. The last thing you put on is the buttons when you sew. The first thing you take off would be the buttons. So I always have been sewing. By the time I hit school with home economics, I was already making full clothing, and the teacher just couldn't understand why I was sewing like this and blamed my mother for doing my work when I brought it home, because I loved to bring my work home because I love to sew. So when report card time came, I did not get a very good mark in sewing because the teacher thought my mother had done the work. And my mother had to go in and explain, no, she's done it on her own. So those are my very earliest memories of sewing. I have a great story about my first sewing machine, and I was very young, and about quilting, but that'll have to be for another day. So I was very fortunate to have the training at my mother's knee and being able to be as creative as my little heart desired. I would love to know when you started sewing, and do you have any great memories? And thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, come on back. Let's see what we're talking about and sewing next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.